In this video, I'll show you how to use sliders from the ControlP5 library to control a parametric design. Let's start from scratch. I like to write out setup and draw because they're kind of the framework for my program, sort of the skeleton or the scaffolding. And I know I'm going to need them. In setup will be everything I need to run once, and in draw will be the interactive behavior of my program. And let's design a box lid. So to start with, I'm just going to set the size. Let's do this big for now. It'll be the size of my canvas. And then we will have draw rectangle. And I'm going to set rectangle mode to center, which means that the x and y coordinates of my rectangle are from the center, so it will grow from the center. Just easier to work with that way. Let's do width over 2, height over 3, so it'll be at the top. And then we'll just start with some numbers. Doesn't really matter how big it is at the moment. We'll start with that. And test it out. Okay, so we've got this rectangle. We're going to want the sliders to make this bigger or smaller. So we have to have some variables in here somewhere that will set the size of this. So these last two parameters here, 150, are the size of the rectangle. Just to show you the interactivity, let's start by making the width be the mouse x coordinate, which is automatically updated by processing. So now as I move the mouse, it draws new rectangles on top. But I haven't cleared the background, so I get this crazy barcode looking thing. So let's clear the background. And what I mean by clear the background is just draw a white background. There we go. So moves with the mouse. It's already interactive, that's pretty exciting. But we may want to control multiple things, so sliders are nice here. I'm going to do something a little bit fun. Let's make the background a more fun color. I'll show you the color selector. We hopped over here. So let's go with like a nice green. And here I can remember these numbers, 15, 160, 49. Where was I? These are the red, green, and blue components. Yeah, that's already a bit more fun. I'll set this to no fill. So we just get that outline, and then let's make the stroke white. It's a little more fun, a little more stylish, cool. So let's do the y coordinate as well, or the size and the y coordinate of the mouse. So now it moves like this. Excellent. So to use the ControlP5 sliders, we need to actually have this rectangle drawing be in a function. So we'll make a function to draw our box lid. So it's void because it's not going to output anything, it's just going to draw to the screen. And we'll call it draw box lid. And we'll put this in here. So if we run this, it's going to basically do, we'll just check. We'll do the same thing as it was doing before. That's interesting. Here's what's going on. So we're not actually calling the function. So draw box lid. Now it should do the same thing. Here we go. So we've made a function here, and then we're calling it inside of draw. Nothing happened when we didn't call it because it was just a definition, but now we're actually using it. Great. So now we need some parameters for this function because we're going to want the slider to pass on its value to the draw box lid function. And that value is going to be the size of the rectangle. So what we can do is, let's not worry about the height for now. We'll just say, back to 50, and we'll work with the width. We're going to want some sort of integer to come in from the slider. So let's call it width, or W. Width is a keyword, so it's confusing. Let's just call it W. So int W, great. So now if we run this, we'll get a complaint. Draw box lid int is not applicable for the arguments empty. And so it needs an integer, so here we could put something in. So that's one solid unchanging thing. let's actually add something that will change over time. And to do that, we'll put in a slider. So all the ControlP5 sliders have a bunch of configuration options. Since I've looked them up in the past for this Parametric code, I'm just going to put them straight in. And this can be in setup, but it gets a little unwieldy, so I'm going to actually make another function. And I'll say add sliders, just so that we can hide all this at the bottom. Great. And I'll run add sliders setup. If you did want to change any of the configuration options in the slider, you would go to the ControlP5 website, which we can find here. Just search for ControlP5 processing and you'll get to the site. And here there's a bunch of examples, details. For any of the controllers, you can go in and look up options, figure out how to change the font, etc., etc. But once you figure them out once, it's nice to just reuse them. Okay, so we've got a diameter slider that was from other code. Let's rename it to width slider because that's actually what we're changing. And we want to make a function that matches this name here, the name that's been put into the slider. So we'll say width slider. And that's going to get called every single time we move the slider, and it's going to pass in the slider value. And so that'll be the slider value that gets passed in. And we want this slider value to somehow affect this function that's being called. So what we'll do is we'll add a global variable. We can call it box width. And in fact box lid width, just because we might actually make the box later. And we can start it as 10, doesn't matter. And then we'll pass this in every frame. So as soon as this variable gets changed in any way, it will get updated on the next frame and we'll actually see it be drawn. So what we want the function that's connected to the slider to do is to change that to whatever our value was. Here is also an opportunity if your slider was in inches, for example, and this box lid width is supposed to be in pixels. Here might be where you would do that conversion and convert depending on the dots per inch or DPI. But we're not going to do that for now. Keep it simple. One last thing we have to do is that we're adding the slider to this ControlP5 object, which is really nice because then we don't have to update it. We don't have to tell it to go pass its value in or call this function or anything. The library takes care of that for us, which is the real advantage of this library. So just look up here, and basically we'll create a ControlP5 object, and that's going to be a global variable because we'll use it throughout the code. We'll import the ControlP5 library because gives us access to all those objects, and then we'll actually initialize the ControlP5 object. We'll do that in setup because we only need to do it once. I'm separating these into little sections here. Later I might go in and comment them. Okay, so let's see if that runs. We have some residual variables that were from the other code. So what we'll do, set value. So this is the initial starting value of the slider. And we also need a range that kind of makes sense. So let's say a starting value could be, we could say whatever we set up here, the box lid width can be the starting value for the slider as well, because then they match each other on the very first frame when we run the code. So I'll put that in there. And then let's set the size and range of the slider. We'll leave the size the same as before. We can fiddle with that once we actually see it on screen. The range, we really only want the width of the lid to get as big as the width of our screen. So let's use the width variable. And then we need a different label. We need width of box lid in pixels. Units are good. Yay, units. And let's see what that looks like. Yay, we have a slider. It's kind of in a weird location, but that's fine. It starts at 10, and so does our width. And here we go. Yay! So what's happening here is you change the value, gets passed into the width slider function because of these having the same name, updates this box lid width variable, and then in the meantime, this draw function is just drawing over and over, and each time it draws it the size at whatever we set this variable to be. So as soon as we change the variable, we see the change on the next frame. Excellent. So here's where we could really fiddle with this. We can move the location of this slider over. For example, maybe I want it to be a slider at the bottom. So I might set its position as being maybe 100 over and height minus 200 down. And then maybe I want it to be horizontal, so then I might make it 400 wide and actually only 15 high, so reverse what it was. See where that is. Right, so that's about right. Now we've got number, we can see the width, and we're in business. So here's where you could add other sliders for the height. You could make a single slider control the height and the width and just be kind of a multiplier for height and width of the box. You could have designs drawn on the box, and the slider could, for example, control the number of designs or the size of the designs or the way in which they tile across. But there we go.